I'm doing a framework just because it gives me some way to share some things that I have learned along the path of life and over many years. And so this the 7 R's of reinvention. And I just want to say right up front that these are not a linear path. These are just, for some reason, the word R, all these great words have to do with reinvention. It gives me just a framework to give to you to help you maybe learn or discover something new or remember something. But really, and I also love the idea that all of these things I'm talking about are really about building resilience. And, and I'll talk about that in a later episode. But today I'm going to try and talk for about 15 minutes. In the first live I did, I talked about the rupture of a life changing event that happens. And how that rupture, really throws us into a whole new reality, a whole new path. It's a life shattering event that basically shatters our identity as we knew it, and we have to step into life and step into healing in a new way. Um, and then I talked about recovery, and that recovery is something that is also part of that path, that we have to create the space to recover. We have to allow grief to heal us and to really be that kind of partner in sort of retrieving ourselves, getting back on our feet. Today, I want to talk about what am I talking about today? Let me think. I am talking about releasing the pain, releasing the grief, and also reevaluation. Those are the 2 R's for today. So, when I speak on release, what I want to talk to you about is a path of grief that I have always followed, and that I followed when I was in deep grief. After Richard passed away suddenly from a pulmonary embolism on the descent of a flight to New York. I was just 43 years old and he was 45. We had 2 daughters in high school. And it was like, I stepped into a whole new reality that day. And what came to me was a mantra that we had always talked about between the two of us. And also, he had written about Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And it was surrender, trust, and accept. In my path through grief, initially, I remember starting to say this to myself very early on in my process. I just remember not knowing how to grieve, but somehow I clicked into this mantra, and I just kept telling myself that this was something I couldn't change, and that this is something I had to surrender into, and I had to allow whatever was going to come, and I had to trust that I would know how to do this process, and then I would receive at some point. But a big part of that surrender and trust was also release. It was the star mantras: surrender, trust, accept, release, to receive. And acceptance really only comes after you release all of the grief that is built inside your your body, all the grief that comes. You have to really allow yourself to go through it. That there's this great Alanis Morissette song, and she says in her song that the only way out is in. And that is how I experienced grief, that every time I allowed myself to surrender to what was initially primal grief and very scary, to lay on the floor and feel like you're going to die from crying so hard and sobbing so hard and not being able to breathe, to allowing that to release. And then what was so amazing and to me was that this feeling of bliss would follow that. And I don't know if I was a trained observer or a witness of myself, but that's what it felt like. I felt like there was some reason why I was able to witness myself going through this while I was going through it. And I believe that's because there is a part of me that was being called to help others. I remember this one moment when I was in one of those grief moments where I just was, it was just so, it had overtaken me so much that I was just flailing around like a splayed fish on the floor, basically. And I remember having this thought, and I remember thinking, like, here I am, this woman who's been so prepared on so many levels to go through this with so many tools in my tool belt. And yet I was on the floor barely surviving. And I thought to myself, how are there mothers that are dealing with, soldiers who are killed, or people around the globe that are losing children, and how are they able to go through this, because it's just so painful. And then I remember thinking, if I make my way through, I have to talk about this and help other people get through this. Because of course, when you're in it, you just don't see what is potentially going to happen to your life. You're only in it, right? And the best way to be in it is to be present and release what's inside. And I made that correlation to, like, living with cancer really early on, because grief that is not expressed feels like something that's just churning in your body and creating toxicity. And I just thought, I want this out of my body. I want it out. I don't want this feeling, these stomach aches I was getting, these things when I wouldn't cry enough would happen to my physical body. And I would know that I wasn't crying enough. I wasn't allowing myself this time that I needed to release. And sure enough, like I said in a moment ago, when I would release, it would create this, just all these endorphins and just these feelings of bliss and peace, because I had let myself go. I had let this grief go. And grief is really an emptying process. It really is. It's like it sort of builds up, and you have these days. At least for me, I had cycles where I would have maybe 2 days of reprieve, and then the 3rd day I would have a really deep bout of grief, and anything might trigger it. I would be at the grocery store and a song might come on. You get very, very sensitive to everything that's going on around you, and whereas before I wasn't really that sensitive. I'd listen to songs and they didn't really touch me, but it seemed like every lyric to every song that had meaning touched my heart. And just somebody might say something and I just fall apart, because you're in this liminal space of healing. And it's not, like I said earlier, it's not a linear path. It's just you're kind of in a dishwasher. But the key thing I want to say is the expressing part of it, the release, the letting go, is such a crucial thing to understand, that if you don't find your path to letting it go, it's going to do things and have its own life. And, I'm not saying that you can control any of this, but you have to listen deeply to your body. You've got to listen deeply to the feelings that arise. And when you're in this process of healing, just knowing that surrender and trust is going to bring you to a place of acceptance. And as you release all of your grief, then you will receive a new life. And that's the STAR, STARR mantra that I teach in my work with women. Um, and I've taught for a very long time. So I hope that you find that helpful. It also is super helpful in traffic. So, if you're not a person in grief right now, then just remember that you can repeat that mantra: surrender, trust, and accept, through any obstacle that might come your way. And it will help you put your mind at ease and give you a path to follow in order to make it through any kind of stressful situation. Um, so then now I'm going to move on and talk about reevaluate, because when we go through this identity crisis, I call it I used to say when people would say to me, "I'm sorry for your loss," I would say, "What are you talking about loss? I didn't lose my car keys." I'd be like, "I didn't lose my car keys." I would call this not loss, what I was going through, I would call this an annihilation. And I say it's a annihilation of the ego, that part of our mind that identifies ourselves with a role or identifies ourselves with who we are by what we do or how we serve or anything. Ego can be anything. It can be the most positive thing in the world. But anytime we identify with that, it's our ego that has identified. And, the ego thinks its job is to keep us safe, right? So anything that is a potential identity is built up to somehow make you feel safe. And so when I talk about annihilation, I talk about now that you've gone through this huge change and transition, your ego has basically just been knocked out of the park. Like, so that isn't a good feeling. We can all agree on that, that when your ego is knocked out of the park, usually how the ego starts climbing up again and creating from nothing is through fear. So the ego will present you with all this emotional fear that you will feel and that it feels very real. But if you know this and you are aware of it, which I was, thankfully, and I had a lot of friends that were reminding me of this. So I was really, like I said, I was very prepared and very lucky. I had some amazing grief coaches that were just really good friends that this is their whole specialty, but they reminded me that my ego was creating this fear. And then I would learn that when I would lean into the fear, on the other side of that was this incredible freedom of self expression. And what started to come to my awareness was this idea that I had been holding this very perfect life for my family, for my husband, for, um, you know, just holding this perfect life. And what became very clear to me in this process of reevaluation of my life was that my life had been shattered and I was no longer holding a perfect life. I remember sitting at my godson's, it was like his kind of his I would say it's his confirmation in church, and I was sitting in the middle of the pews, and all these people from my area were with their families, and I had this awareness that they were all holding these perfect lives, and mine was no longer perfect, and what a relief I felt on some level. It was weird, like, you'd think I would be, like, devastated, and of course I was devastated. I was devastated at losing the love of my life, and but there was some sort of notion that of this letdown, of all this perfection and all this holding and this living this role and all of these these expectations that I had of myself were completely gone. And what I was sitting with and what I sat with in grief was, wow, I had this feeling that would bubble up like, wow, I'm feeling me more than I've ever felt me in my adult life. Like I was feeling this sense of like, this is just who I am. Like, this is me, but I'm not attached to being anyone or anything right now, except that I was a mother. And of course, I was still very attached to being a mother to my daughters. But there was this other part of me that was just really stunned by that realization that my identity as wife, as Richard's wife, and holding this perfect life for everyone just was completely shattered. And I started to awaken to this idea of, well, if I'm not living a role, then I am just who I am. And so when we get to that, that space of reevaluating, it's like we can start to look at what really matters to us and what do we value in this moment. There's that word value is in reevaluate. And when we ask ourselves what matters to us and what do we value most right now and right here, sometimes it's those incredible obstacles. It's those incredible times in our lives where we feel like we're at an all time low that we have this clarity. Have you ever experienced that? I had so much clarity that first year and 2 years after Richard died, so much clarity. And I just had so much awareness and insight, and life just looked so different to me. And I would like look outside and of course, I was searching for him in the sky and I was looking for him in all the stars. And I would feel the wind and see the clouds in the sky. And I would hear him say, "Look what I can do now. I can paint angel wings for you in the sky." And I had this depth that was going on from my soul, and where I was reaching, really reaching to find him where he was. But that served me so beautifully. And it showed me so much and it expanded my vision for life. And I started to feel more alive in grief than I had been living in life when I was living these roles, when I was just being an actor in my own play and not really feeling the depth of life that I felt in grief. And grief taught me that when we surrender to it and we awaken, we can choose not that this happened, but how we move forward. And, and I chose to open myself. I chose to pray with all my heart that I would return to a life of joy again, that my kids would survive this, that we would get through this as a family, and that there would be joy in our path again. And certainly, um, because I think that, that's what my deepest desire was. I wasn't sure I was going to get there, but I think that when we somehow we can evaluate and we can decide that we want to be in joy again, that's our deep desire, that we will find a way to get there. And, it was interesting because I didn't do a lot of reading when I was in grief, but I read some things. And I particularly read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, the poetry in that book, and had so much meaning for me in grief. And there was just one quote that just resonated so deeply, and that is that your greatest joy is your sorrow unmasked. And your greatest joy is your sorrow unmasked. That stuck with me and has stuck with me all these years, that when we can allow ourselves to, go through this sorrow that we feel and we allow ourselves to release it, then we're able to see a path to joy again and even just be in joy again. And I think that's like a really nice place to stop. Does anyone want to put in the chat any questions they have or comments or anything? I'm going to put my glasses on. I'm going to say hi to everyone: Mary and Donna, Laura. Let's see, Diana. Hi, Diana. Erica, Julie, GB, Andre, GB. Oh, it's good to see you all here. And yeah, anybody want to put in the chat anything? I'm going to open up the chat here and take a peek. You can just say hi if you want to. But really wonderful to see that you came on live today. And I think we've gone for almost 20 minutes today. So I am going to close off here and just say thanks for coming on. You will get the replay, and glad to see you on Substack. I've really just enjoying Substack so much. Oh, thanks for the love. Thank you so much for the love. But just really wonderful to see you on Substack. Substack's a great place to build community, and quite honestly, I've never been great at building community, but I'm going to work at it and try harder. I'm great at leading women's retreats. I'm great at being a great friend, and but building community has been a little bit challenging for me. But I'm going to do it here on Substack. I'm going to offer a lot more things in my Substack for people, and really try and do my best at building community here. And also, I just think it's a great platform. It's really just a wonderful place for writers and readers to come. So thank you for being here today. And if you aren't and you're watching this through the email, Substack is super easy. You can subscribe and follow people or subscribe. If you subscribe to people, you're going to find yourself on their email list. But if you follow people, you're just going to see them pop up in your feed. Like you'll see their articles, but it's a wonderful platform and it's free. So you don't, you can come on and subscribe. You don't have to do a paid subscription, although we all appreciate a paid subscription because we put in a lot of time and energy into these into our Substack, but it's not a necessity if it's a hardship for you. So I just want to thank you for coming on today. Thank you for listening. I hope that you found this inspirational and helpful. You might want to look at my latest book, From Heartbreak to Wholeness, The Hero's Journey to Joy, or Heartbroken Open, a memoir I wrote through going through my loss. And then come back for the next live. I'm doing these every 2 weeks. And we'll go to the next 2 R's, which I can't tell you what they are because I haven't thought about it yet. So, I mean, I have a list of them, of course, but I can't tell you right now what they are. So I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.